Hey everyone, it's Michael Fair from BIT here. Welcome to another episode of Talking with Tech Leaders. Today I'm joined by Jonny Mallabar, Head of Architecture, Design and Planning at the ACCA. In part 1 we talked through Jonny's career. Part 2, optimising architecture teams for a platform and SaaS world. Jonny shares lots of examples on how he's optimised teams and how that's had an impact on organisations. The balance for skills versus general knowledge in an architecture team, challenges for scaling, how you should address them, looking at maintaining agility and flexibility in the team, and how to measure the success and effectiveness of your architecture team. Really insightful episode, very interesting guest, Jonny. But yeah, I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I did recording it, and here we go. Hi everyone, it's Michael Fair from BIT here, and welcome to another episode of Talking with Tech Leaders. Today we're joined by Jonny Mallabar, Head of Architecture, Planning and Design at the ACCA. How are you, Jonny? You well?
I'm very well, thanks Michael. Yes, pleased to be here.
Glad to hear it. Awesome. No, thanks very much for the time. Do appreciate it. And today, on this episode, we're going to be part 2. The theme is optimising architecture teams for a platform and SaaS world. And obviously, who better to speak to than yourself as the Head of Architecture Design and Planning at the ACCA. Obviously, you've got a lot of experience in technical development, corporate strategy, leadership, and you've led teams at Harmonic, HP, Cascadian, as well as consulting with organisations like kind of Serco in the UK, the Ministry of Education in Saudi Arabia. I look forward to unpacking that. And obviously a lot of experience you've kind of got there lies in delivering business value through systems thinking, enterprise architecture, and aligning against corporate strategy and the kind of business model that company's going with. We usually start these off at the very beginning, and it's usually kind of some form of academia.
Oh, academia, going back a little while. Actually, I'll go a tiny bit further back, if I'm being honest, because I didn't enjoy school much, so I left at 16, and it took me a little while to go to college, and I kind of did all sorts of things, but focused on outdoor sports, things like that. I was a lumberjack for a while, did a year of conservation work and all this kind of stuff. And I eventually made it to college in my early mid-20s, but I studied ecology. So my first degree is in ecology, and then I went on and did a master's in genetics. So nothing to do with tech in either space. And then I had a short career working with people like Kew Gardens and Natural History Museum in London, and doing kind of survey work for British Wildlife Trust and things like that. So very different starts to a lot of people in the tech world. But I kind of crossed over as I kind of moved into my kind of late 20s, and that is didn't get qualified in tech, but kind of just kind of crossed over on a opportunistic basis because I had a lucky entry.
That's so interesting. Yeah, what a kind of beginning. I mean, was there an interest in technology at the start that just didn't kind of really grab your attention? It was more, ecology, the environment that grabbed your attention at the start. What was the kind of drivers then?
Well, it was the. I thought I'd be having a career in ecology, and the environment, and I think it was. I've got a couple of brothers, but one of my brothers was always into tech. And I just saw it as a gaming thing. I didn't take it any further. But kind of back in the kind of 80s, he would be sitting there coding away, and I'd just play the games and go and do something else kind of thing. So it was always in the house, but it wasn't really in my blood, And what basically happened was I just remember kind of in my late 20s sitting outside back at my mum's house with my brother, just talking about what we were both doing. And the work I'd been doing in the kind of ecology and environment space had morphed into an awful lot of database work. And I was helping people there. So I kind of had a natural aptitude towards helping people with kind of plant recording and environmental analysis and things like that. And when we discussed what he was doing in a startup in London and what I was doing, there was a lot of similarities. And so he got me an interview. And from there, I kind of made that crossover from the world of ecology to the world of a London startup working in networking sphere. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because it just shows you that your job title doesn't have to say, developer, architect, or systems analyst or anything to start, because the role you were doing in the environment, like working with databases, recording data, doing some analytics on it, I'm sure. I mean, was that the kind of sliding door moment for you then, where you were kind of, I'll move into tech and give it a try, or?
It absolutely was, because I remember at the time I very nearly left it again in the first 6 months, because I
Really?
was, I moved over into a help desk role. And this is a company called Micromuse, which is now owned by IBM. And I was picking up the phones, and we basically sold software to manage large telco networks back in that period. And so I'd have people talking to me about from AT&T, from BT, saying kind of their system's not working properly, it's not recording this, that, and the other. And I had a really steep learning curve. But as I kind of climbed that learning curve, I found I really started enjoying myself. And with Micromuse, I did spend 5 years in various help desk capacities. But what was quite nice there was I ended up running what was a global escalation team. And so we basically, any deal over like 100K, we may get involved in if it wasn't going well. And so we'd help with all the deals. So it got a very, very good commercial edge. And it also kind of got me traveling around the world, so I could set up an office in Dallas in America, and went out to Japan, and it was kind of just lots and lots of travel, and it's just really exciting, for a young man to kind of suddenly make that move from slightly sleepy ecology, just kind of wandering around doing plant surveys, to suddenly I'm flying around in business class, when I got lucky business class anyway. But kind of, exactly, very
That's
different
awesome.
environment.
Yeah. I've always wanted to go to Japan, and I mean, what age were you when you went there? When did this all happen?
I would have been about 31, I guess.
That's awesome.
31, 32, but yeah.
What an opportunity, yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds great.
It's very high fueled. I think that's kind of why I left that company in the end, because it was everything was very deal focused, and you're always kind of essentially you run an escalation team. All you deal with is the hardest problems, and very rewarding. You get that instant feedback, but kind of if you want to work on more strategic, longer term things, you don't really get the opportunity.
It's like fast, effective, get it done. And it's not that there's a breather in between the next one's here. You're just kind of constantly in that, fast state. I can imagine it's fun to start with, exciting. But yeah, I can imagine over time,
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
cool.
You kind of you want to move on in time. Yeah.
Yeah, not completely. And what was like, I suppose, at that age, kind of go to Japan or, Dallas, Texas and stuff like that, and you're learning about different cultures, the way people work, different companies operate, culture, values, all that kind of stuff. Was that quite insightful to learn about early on?
It was, because it is very different in these different countries. You don't realize even how different the American culture is to the British, until you actually go there and work there for a little while. And I do remember a very strange episode in Japan where I was there. We were basically taking it in turns being I wouldn't be careful what word I use here. We were encouraged not to leave until the problem was fixed, and so you couldn't kind of get out. You couldn't really commercially leave until somebody else went and joined you, and then you could kind of then go back home. And it got into this very strange situation where, because we were reliant on the dev organisation in London to fix things, people would go out there for a bit of a holiday because you needed a face of the company. So you could go out as a face of the company, keep the customer happy because they always wanted somebody on site. But just culturally, it got quite strange. Boardrooms are different, very hierarchical, compared to what we're used to, especially if you go 1 week you're dealing with a board in America, and then you go to a board in Japan. And whether things have got more similar now, they maybe to an extent, but at the time it was very a much more formal and hierarchical environment.
Yeah, that's really strange. I mean, I read something, I watched a video probably on maybe Instagram or TikTok or something, where in Japan, if you're doing a presentation, and at the end of it, if you ask anyone's got questions, nobody will put their hand up. But what you'll notice is people will look at you if they've got a question. And I thought that was really strange. If you've not got a question, they'll look away kind of thing. I thought, it's just different cultures and way things work, isn't it? But,
yeah, no, absolutely.
Cool. I mean, so you're getting your kind of teeth cut, you're getting that experience, you're traveling about the world. What was next on your journey?
Well, I spent about 5 years with Micromuse, and then I moved on to working with the large system integrators. So at the time, if you think it's people like EADS, EDS, HP, like EDS was purchased by HP, and then that's now become DXC in kind of today's world. But it was I kind of called them the Blair kind of huge IT projects at the time. So I had this huge NHS project which I didn't work on, but one I did spend on and off about 10 years working on was one called the DII, the Defence Infrastructure Initiative, or what I think is £4.5 billion project.
Wow.
And it's just, the scale is, I think that's the first time I understood what architecture was. Because up until that point, I could design a system and I'd do it with a couple of pages of notes to hand over to somebody. And it might be a really good system, but it was a little bit more cowboyish, in that you kind of you made it work and then you were back on your way again. And it was working on kind of a DII where you'd have like kind of 600 highly skilled engineers, and the CTO office was, I think it was 60 people worked into the CTO office. And so the scale was huge,
Even like, the change process, like security as well, and making sure that everything's, like, that sounds mind-boggling. And what were you kind of doing within that organisation over the 10 years? Were you getting really involved in the architecture and mapping out? And
well, I started off as if you think that my background in the tech world anyway was in network management, and the company I was working with had expanded into kind of enterprise system management, so we could manage any endpoint, and from a kind of monitoring and security perspective. And so I was in there as what we called a system architect, and so I was designing the architecture to monitor all the endpoints and do all the alerting on security alerting. And it's just really big, Michael, because I think there's 300,000 users. It was the biggest private network in Europe. It's like everything MOD, which was not kind of what we call battle space. So it was everything which was for running this huge kind of organization, which is Ministry of Defence.
Was there kind of any pivotal moment? I mean, that's 10 years, so it's a kind of, obviously enjoyed what you were doing there, and kind of obviously work on that kind of program project over those different integrators. Was there any kind of big breaks you had, or defining projects? I mean, that's quite a defining one, I'm sure. Was there any others?
There's certain ones stick in the mind which are quite unusual. So myself, I went on a bit of a journey. I didn't spend the full 10 years there. I went and did another project, which we may touch on, but it was little challenges which were quite unique, is like paying a pension to a Gurkha in Nepal. You had to design a system to make sure that somebody in a hut in a kind of a British Army representative could make sure that people were still alive, get the pension sent out, and kind of all this kind of just really nitty-gritty enterprise stuff, which you just don't think of in the complexity of doing that is quite kind of quite surprising back in 2005, 2006, which was the period we're talking about. And then other projects which were very interesting was deploying into kind of the field-based systems, like kind of so that a soldier deployed in Afghanistan could book his holiday, or book a dentist, So it's really that stuff which keeps the whole thing working, And so you don't
think about stuff like that, do you? Yeah.
No. But you kind of. Everyone's employed, so to speak, and they have wives, families, and as they obviously do. But it's the practicalities of all of that.
Oh, completely. And I mean, when you're looking at these applications that have to, architectures or systems that have to kind of pass data through different countries, if it's pensions, obviously compliance that are involved in that, and that's be sent in a certain form or data secured in this manner. I can imagine it does get fairly complicated.
Yeah, and then you're also working with allies and things like that. So you've kind of got that kind of between the different kind of UK allies, and so it's a very complex world. But what was very good about it from a learning point of view is it's also a very organised world in a different way to a lot of commercial environments are, and a lot of things we deal with now, because there's obviously its defence. There's a hierarchy to the way it operates. It's very contractually managed, which was difficult, and it was also at that period where from my experience, we moved from kind of a waterfall, very contractual delivery approach to an agile delivery approach to commercial off-the-shelf software being purchased and figuring out that you had to it didn't quite meet your needs. And so you're kind of bringing all this stuff together at a huge scale with thousands of people working on it, and it's, the complexity. We once printed out a list of all the different kind of projects running with their dependencies, and you could wallpaper a room with it. There's just so much going on. You couldn't fit it in your head.
Yeah. I can imagine. I'd want to try and have like a picture in my head of how everything connects together. I can imagine that just be absolutely impossible. And I mean, and I suppose then, when you're kind of doing that kind of work, I think companies try and move to more modular now, so that if something fails or falls over, it's not like a domino effect. Was it like that then, or was everything kind of getting knitted together more, or was it still the kind of same thinking around it?
No, well, because of the scale, in my space anyway, and I think it's true as it scaled out, it was just inherently modular, because that's the way defence organisations think. And so it's all kind of N+1, it's like kind of, you may scale out to multiple kind of army bases or multiple kind of submarines and ships. You could just keep adding on to it as needed, and so you also needed, especially with the kind of deployed environment, you needed to have that independence of operation. So if you lost connectivity for whatever reason, then when you kind of regain connectivity, you can start syncing things up, and kind of everything would recover. And so it was inherently built in, and we were probably at more the early stage of it. It didn't have the elasticity which you find now in cloud systems by any means, but it was heading that direction.
And do you see much in terms of like cybersecurity and things like that, or like having like zero trust networks and things during that time?
No, not within that space. That started to come in, but when I was working there, it was all kind of perimeter controlled, and everything was very hard locked down. So it wasn't that zero trust kind of legal model. That hadn't come in yet.
No. Right, cool. That's interesting. Just like to, understand. It's always hard to perception of it, kind of that time. What was like. What was after that then? What was your kind of next move? Where did you go?
Well, after I left. After basically left HP in about 2015, and then I did a couple of kind of contracts, thinking what to do, and one of those was the Ministry of Education, Saudi Arabia, which is a fairly small contract, but it was quite good fun because it, again, culturally very different, and we were operating up to a deputy minister level in the Saudi government, and so very formal, and little things like kind of you could, when a meeting went well, you'd be served tea afterwards. If the meeting went bad, you didn't get the tea. So
you just like
very clear signaling,
the tea card, I mean, who, was it like a recruiter saying like, Johnny, as we're looking, do you fancy going to Saudi Arabia? Like, how did that kind of come about?
That was exactly what happened. I got a phone call out of the blue, and there's me and this other guy, and we got this gig which was looking at, basically they had merged their IT departments between the secondary and primary education into the higher education. And so they'd taken two very distinct organisations serving very different people, and they'd merged the IT infrastructure together, the IT management, and by that the infrastructure together. And so we were looking at the target operating model and what we could do to improve it. So it's very much looking at it from an IT operating model perspective.
And just out of curiosity, what was the comedy? I mean, we kind of just like, I just want to say, but I don't know if this is just kind of things you see in the previous in the news and things like that. I mean, did you feel safe when you were there? Was it like quite a nice, relaxed environment? Was it high tensions? What was it kind of like?
Well, it's funny you say that, because yes, I felt absolutely safe out there, and I had been out to the Middle East a couple of times over the years, and never had a bad experience. But saying that, I do remember. Kind of because there was the ongoing kind of conflict with Yemen that was going on, rumbling along back there, and I do remember hearing about the odd rocket hitting the edge of Riyadh and things like that, and nobody getting hurt particularly or anything like that, but just these odd things going on, and you kind of you'd notice it a lot more if it's happening in the UK, put it that way. But you're kind of out there and you're in a 5-star hotel or whatever, and it's kind of just, you hear it second hand or third hand, kind of goes around on the WhatsApp messages between people and things like that. Yeah.
And did you find that with contractor communities in places like that you kind of got a bit of community with the different contractors and things, and you go for dinner together and things like that? And
Yeah, well, you get it because it's culturally so different. You are an expat out there, and you're kind of you don't get the chance to integrate in the same way you may have, and so you do kind of very much interact with other contractors and other international workers who may be kind of from, not necessarily from Europe or UK. They could just well be from India or the Philippines or places like that. But you get a kind of multicultural group of people who are kind of working there kind of on a contract basis or employed out there. But yeah.
So next contract from there then, were you kind of back into the UK, or are you?
Back into the UK, I did a short spell with a kind of company you'll probably know quite well as well, Carmack Ferries. And so I kind of had a short spell there, which was quite fun and games. And I also did a spell with where I may have got the order slightly wrong here, but with ACCA as well, which is where I'm based. And so that's how kind of we knew each other, because I did a 6-month contract working in there back in 2015. And I think contracting's kind of, it may have had its day in some regards, but it is good, but you don't have the same commitment to the organisation, and that's kind of it's difficult to commit to the organisation in the same way, because you're not thinking their long term, and you're not thinking their career growth in the same way. After, I guess it'd be about a year and a half or so of contracting, I took a job with a company called Harmonic, which was a type of company I didn't know existed, if I'm being honest, when I joined them. Because what they specialised in was called business winning, which is an interesting one. So they would help. They were based in the kind of southwest of England. We worked a lot with the big defence companies, and that's kind of how we kind of knew each other, because I'd heard of them before and from my time working in defence. And they basically helped the likes of Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Leonardo win these very large defence contracts. And so they had a specialised team who would help consume the kind of request for proposal, the RFP which came out. They'd pick it apart. They'd bring in the experts who maybe, I don't know, logistics for a helicopter or something like that, because the kind of contracts were very long-term maintenance contracts or the engineering development contracts. And they would put together a package so that company was best placed to actually win the work. And it may go and help on with delivering it, which we did in some instances, or it may just be then handed over to the winning company if they were successful. And so it's a very different world.
Yeah. I've worked with a company maybe similar to that before, and the level of detail they go into when an RFP comes out, when they kind of, are you answering the question, and they break it down, and it's like, everything's perfectly laid out. It is amazing. And I can imagine with defence contracts and things, it's so meticulous that you get everything right.
Yeah. Well, you kind of, the funny thing about some of the, in defence space, your maintenance, your supply chain for maintaining, say, a military vehicle may need to expand out about 30 years, which you just don't think about. Not like fast-moving tech world, I'm doing the IT bit. I'm not a hard engineer in terms of a kind of mechanical engineering or anything, and it's just you don't think that way, because it's everything's obsolete in a couple of years. You want a new phone every 2 years, don't you?
Yeah, it's a kind of rate of change just now, isn't it? Or the pace of it. It's I'm sure we'll get into some of that in the part 2, but yeah, it's just so quick. Hard to map it out. But it's really interesting that you kind of went to, obviously, ACCA first on a kind of contract basis. And, you kind of seen the head of architecture role in the market and, thought, well, I enjoyed that time, and you're going to go back, or what was that like for you?
Well, I had a bit of a gap in between. I joined ACCA in 2021, it was, so only 3 years ago now. And basically, off the back of working with Harmonic, I kind of took a bit of a break. I took a year out, and I actually went away and I did a diploma in philosophy, amongst other things, but just took a bit of time to chill out. And I think I was a little bit burnt out from a very busy time of. It's like, if you remember pre-COVID, people were always in offices, and like I was away every single week, probably for about 10 years, and back at the weekend. That's kind of what my life was. It was always on the road and then coming back, and so I kind of took a chance to kind of relax a bit and I guess chill out a little bit over 2020, and then the role just came up at ACCA. It wasn't actually head of architecture; it's joining the architecture team. But after I joined, the head of architecture kind of left soon after I joined, and I moved into that role.
You've been doing this position now for the last 3 years, yeah?
Yeah, about 3 years, just over.
Awesome. And I know that ACC obviously have a kind of global presence, and we're talking about kind of data in different regions and connections and protocols, controls. I mean, because the ACC is like in Europe, China. It's
Well,
global.
it's an interesting. We kind of joke it's kind of a medium-sized company with a multinational-sized company problems and challenges. It operates kind of 180. I think it's 188 countries we operate in, where you can kind of do an ACCA qualification.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got a huge scale, and it's got a lot of regional offices, and we're kind of, because as an organisation we're very focused on, very value based, and so we see the growth and professionalism of the accountancy profession as being good for kind of global business, and particularly good for developing countries and emerging economies and things. And so we have a very big presence in kind of the more, I guess, the developing world and the emerging economies.
Yeah, I mean, how do you kind of keep up to date with tech? I suppose even like legalities of it all. I'm sure there's a team of people, but that's a lot to keep an eye on in terms of all the different countries and what they're doing, and
it's interesting because when you're trying to say, if you think about, say, the China market, excuse me, there, very quick drink of water here.
Oh, no, sorry.
Sorry about that. But if you think about, say, China, so I think the interesting thing about kind of that global footprint is you have different technologies in different countries, plus you have different legislation. And so if you think about China, which is 20% of our market in terms of students and members, and they use very different technologies. They really don't like email. Everything's on the phone. Everything's done over a kind of WeChat and a host of other services. They can't have YouTube. They can't access YouTube, because it's not present there. WhatsApp isn't present there. So things which we use in other parts of the world, you can't use there. And plus you've got a very different language and culture. And also there's quite strict regulations in terms of cross-border data transfer. And so kind of, do you have to put your systems into China to meet that, or can you kind of have a global instance, which is what we want from an efficiency perspective? And it kind of, in terms of keeping abreast of it, in a way I gave up. I employed a Chinese enterprise architect to keep us abreast of what's going on. And so, it was kind of getting just too hard. And so we've got a very small presence from an IT perspective in China. We've got quite a big sales, kind of what we call relationships team out there. But we've got a couple of people who are just dedicated for IT in China. One's a enterprise architect a great lady called Amanda who works for me. Then there's another guy called Billy who he manages the IT supply chain in China for us, because it's kind of got a bit too hard to do remotely. But yeah,
that's awesome. I remember we were doing I think it was the website. Right, I think we got a contract role with the ACC and like a Mandarin speaking tester. And I was like, I'll give it a go. And we did find someone. She was there for quite a while, but it's quite interesting. You get weird and wonderful jobs kind of coming through. Obviously you've spent a long time in technology, in architecture. How have you kind of seen the role evolve kind of over the years in terms of architect or being an architect?
I'd say it's changed a huge amount, and if you think about the job has changed as well. And so when I kind of like I was talking about kind of my days in network management, and then into kind of large enterprises in the kind of early part of the turn of the century, and then we built everything. It's like you'd build a data center, and you'd kind of you rack it up, and you go in there and you install the OS, and you build the whole thing up, and then you'd layer it. And we also kind of, when we integrated, it was quite hard to integrate. I'm not saying it's not hard now, but in a different way. You had APIs, but it was a lot more kind of a lot more coding, a lot more configuration. And so, from an architectural perspective, you were building a lot more of the foundations. And if you kind of think of the journey we've gone on, where we've gone from kind of building from the tin upwards, which is what we would do. We now kind of we moved into kind of infrastructure as a service with AWS and things, where it wasn't so much it was better, it was so convenient. You went from kind of a month or two to get the kit in to where you could just turn it on in a couple of hours. And so you kind of went on that journey. Now you kind of start fast forwarding where, depending on whether you're in a company selling software or you're in a company buying it, like the ACCA, you're kind of plumbing things together, and you're working much more at a service level. And you may not know how the service you're configured is, but you purchase is actually built. And you can kind of ask lots of questions, but they may not want to share with you. And could be running on AWS, could be running on Azure, depending on the criticality. You'll kind of ask the questions, but you only find out so much because you might be buying it as a kind of a SaaS service doing a specific thing for you, and kind of really understanding it is quite difficult. So you kind of abstracted away from it.
At an event once, and one of the CTOs was talking about AWS and Azure and things, and I was like, why do you use two? Why don't you just use the one? And like, well, one. If they know that, then they might put my prices up. And the other is obviously having that kind of shared risk if something happens to one of them. And I was like, that's so interesting. And you're saying obviously if you use a SaaS service, they might just say it's the service and not actually tell you, what's at the kind of back end of it. As long as they're providing, there's no downtime.
Yeah, well, you kind of you saw that recently, didn't you, with CrowdStrike, where how many of those companies had an outage, and luckily, touchwood, we were largely unaffected, but knew that CrowdStrike, they may not have even known it was part of their supply chain, because it could have been a second or third vendor who's hosting something for a company which you're buying a core product from. And I think things have got simpler on one level, but they become very opaque, and you can't see into what's actually behind the services you're buying quite often.
I remember I did my work experience at Standard Life on Lothian Road. And, one of the days it was like coming to the data centre. This big frozen room, filled with racks and racks of servers, and there was guys changing blades and things like that. But like you're saying, you knew what was there. If that wasn't working, it was blinking. They're changing this and patching stuff, etc. But now it's people can be in their house and you can spin up computing power, storage, within like a couple of hours.
Well, I've got a friend who manages 3,000 servers from his house in Cape Town on a global basis. Just over. He uses what's it called? Starlink. So he operates over Muscat, Starlink really? From South Africa. In Cape Town, a beautiful little house, and he manages 3,000 servers globally. And been doing that for about 5 years.
That's amazing. Elon Musk just sorting it out. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Is there any kind of setbacks, or I don't like that question, but any failures or anything you've kind of had that's been really challenging that you've kind of overcome kind of during your career?
Setbacks. There's one project which I think we rescued something out of it, which it was actually a really interesting project which we did for Cidian, which is part of Airbus. This is an Airbus company, basically specialised in security space. And there's a project we were doing for the UK government called Fire Control. And basically it was building a mobilisation system for any blue light service. So it's called, in this case, it was the Fire Brigade, and it was consolidating the English Fire Brigade into 3 regions was the plan at the time. And fascinating project because we had to kind of deal with things such as turning on a pelican crossing outside a fire station, and then raising the fire station doors and sending down secure codes to a pad in the fire engine so it could get into a secure building. All these kind of things needed to be figured out. And if there was a fuel storage near a building, that had to appear on a map so that they knew there was a risk. And it's instant. Instant. And I think it was it was one of these large government contracts, and we were just ahead of ourselves. We were trying too hard. Everyone was over ambitious, and this was before we all used Google Maps. This was about 2008, 2009, and it was coming through. You're noticing that kind of Google Maps was better than what we were delivering, even though we'd be using something kind of which was proprietary, and it was kind of robust in lots of ways. And eventually it kind of got into this kind of cost overrun, delay, confidence situation where when the coalition government came in about 2010, it was one of the projects which they axed upon coming in. And so immediately this huge project was shut down. And so that was a real kind of a real disappointment, because we'd been working really hard to do something which is felt pretty special at the time. And so it's a massive setback, and an awful lot of people were let go and drifted off to do other projects and things. But what we did, which was kind of the interesting bit for me, kind of which we managed to salvage out of it, was we turned it into a reference architecture on how to build these things. And so we kind of went back to what is really at the heart of a mobilisation system, whether that's for, I don't know, coast guards, fire engines, ambulances, police cars. What's really at the heart of that? And we turned that into a reference architecture, which I hope is still being used today in Cassidian. It's like I'm not really involved with that company anymore, but it was being used to then sell into lots of different other international countries, such as Switzerland for, I think it's Basel Ambulance Service, and it was a kind of Coast Guard in Saudi Arabia, and anywhere where a kind of Cassidian had a contact, they then started trying to sell what was left of the service onwards. And the reference architecture kind of pulled something really meaningful out of it, which is good.
Yeah, it's awesome, because you've kind of worked so hard on something and you've kind of like felt passionate about it, given what it is you're delivering. And then that's unfortunately happened, but not through. I mean, it's kind of difficult, isn't it? It's all the enhancements, all the things you know that you could do to be amazing for them to have, to make it better. And it was really good that the company kind of thought, right, can we make this into an opportunity? And then obviously started to kind of try with others. So that's really awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Is there any advice? I mean, I suppose going back through your career, is there any advice you would give to your kind of younger self starting out?
I think one thing which I think I'd definitely say, be more patient. Don't be in such a hurry, because I think kind of I was always, it's very easy to always be chasing a promotion or chasing the next contract and things like that. And I think I would advise myself to slow down a little bit and enjoy where I am a bit more, rather than thinking kind of after a year or two, I want to be in that role, or kind of, why is that person in charge of me? I want to be in charge of them, kind of thing. So slowing down a little bit, I think I could have definitely done that in my 30s, would have been a good thing. But you never quite, I think that would be my advice. Yeah, be a bit more patient.
I think that's really good advice, especially with all the things on Instagram and TikTok and things like that now for young people, and they're driving these cars and doing these things, and materialism, and to get those things, you to get more money, and it's kind of like self-perpetuating, when actually like the happiness is in the now, isn't it? And actually realising what's there. So
it is, and I think it kind of, as you get older, as you kind of mature in life, and you kind of build up a broader network of colleagues. And I think one thing you don't realise when you're starting out in a career, quite often you still know the same people you start your career with in 20 years' time, which is quite interesting. It's like I still know the people from kind of when I worked for Mike Muse back in 2000, who was still kind of that's one of my biggest networks still, and you know people who have they just didn't move on, they just stayed, and they've kind of climbed the rung, kind of like IBM or something like that, in a nice steady fashion, and it's a different career, and different careers suit different people. But I think, just maybe taking stock of where you are rather than chasing the shiny is not a bad idea. Yeah,
and really good advice what you're saying there is kind of, do keep in touch with people that you worked with, because Scotland's not a massive place, so usually we'll bump into them again at some point.
No, I'm always surprised at that, about how many people worked with other people who even if you don't know them personally, within kind of 1 or 2 degrees of separation, you will know somebody who they've worked with. But you do as well.
Totally. Yeah. Oh yeah. Comes in handy in recruitment.
Yes.
So part 2, optimising architecture teams for a platform in the SaaS world. What are the key factors to consider then when kind of optimising an architecture team?
There's a few different angles on this, and it's like with my role at ACCA, it's like myself as an architect, I'm an enterprise architect. That's kind of where I've spent most of my kind of practicing career, as opposed to a solution architect. And so more thinking in terms of the why we're doing things, how we align that against a business strategy, thinking about the organisation as a whole, rather than specific project solutions. And so there's 2 elements. One is the enterprise, one is the solution, the project delivery. And what's changed is that when we were talking earlier on about that move over my career from kind of building things from the ground up to kind of contracting for service, which is what we do now, much more so, the role of the architect has changed a lot. And so whereby you'd have a lot of, say, technical architects who could put in the networks in the data centers for you, who could calculate the compute needs, and ensure you had enough bandwidth, or who could kind of do the software engineering and the kind of deep integration. Those roles are becoming, they're still there, but they're more within the sales side. They're in the vendors who are building the stuff. So kind of the people who are working for AWS and things. And whilst when you're in kind of the world of ACCA or kind of a mid-sized company who is consuming service of others, you're not building as much as you used to. You're more kind of assessing products. And so the role of the solution architect, I'd say, has changed to where they're more product focused. And kind of, if you're really specializing or focusing on a particular organization, a particular seller, like maybe AWS or the Microsoft world, then you really need that deep expertise in that one company. And you're less of a generalist. You're more of a, you're more closely tied, I think, in some ways to the platform service or the SaaS service. And that's kind of made the roles a little bit different shaped, because you're as a solution architect, you're sitting between the functional expert and the kind of the business itself, because the business is being sold to. The technology is much more democratized now. It's not all within the realms of IT, and there's a lot of business technologists who will know more about the actual product they wanted to purchase than perhaps you do in IT, even though it's like it's technology product. And so what you've effectively got into this situation where your architectural team may not be the expert in the way it once was. And it's still there from a security perspective. It's still there from networking and the non-functional side. But you're relying and you're kind of co-creating and collaborating much more with the business. And I think that's one of the things which has changed. And then your enterprise teams, I think, have had to kind of step up further, because they're not order taking in the same way, where you're kind of saying, let's go and talk to the business, we'll capture their requirements, we'll take it away, we'll knock it up, and we'll go back with a nice solution for them. They may not have the patience for that now, because they're expecting it to be, they're being told by the vendors, oh, we can just turn that on, or we could do that very quickly, do this, that, and the other. And so
wait.
yeah.
Oh, no, I can imagine that's sort of
the pace of change is much quicker. Patience is shorter. And so when you're thinking about your architectural teams in that environment, you need a lot more soft skills in the team. And you need to kind of keep an eye on the expertise in the products it's a different way, because you always had those close, but you'd always have someone who would say, I don't know, VMware architect. Those roles have always been there. But today it's kind of, you've climbed up into, you need to be a Power Platform expert, or you need to kind of understand kind of the information management software and things like Purview. You've got to kind of have that.
It's more niche, kind of like.
Well, it's more niche, and there's more of these niches, which makes it quite difficult.
Even thinking of what you're saying there, I'm like, there's so many.
Yeah. Well, you'll see that from your recruitment, won't you?
We want ServiceNow. We want the Power Apps platform. We want them to have worked with Flow or do the Microsoft Fabric platform and know all this, and you're just like, it's not easy.
Yeah, and it can be quite intimidating from a architectural perspective, where you come from a background where you were the expert on a lot of this stuff. You could understand it all, and now you kind of got to take a step back into, well, what's my real business need here, and then start thinking about it in those terms. And so you have quite a reliance on the vendor in a different way, and in the process, it's really changed the shape of it's like my old company with HP, which is now part of DXC. These businesses seem to have shrunk, because they're not doing the integration in the same way. They're not managing the services in the same way, because the services can manage themselves to an extent. And so what you lay on top is quite different to what you used to, and so the world's definitely changed. And when you start thinking about how do you construct an architectural team there, you're kind of always a bit torn because you go out to market to recruit and you're kind of thinking, well, I need these 3 specialisms, but then I'm really getting a platform architect, and is that what I want? And how do I then handle this random stuff coming from left field? And so you kind of end up with this balance where you will deliberately focus on having people who are experts in certain technologies, and then you need 1 or 2 generalists who can pick up the bits around the edges, who can turn their hands to many things, and they still have value, but you don't have quite so many within the teams.
I suppose they're important as well because they're like not off put by going to learn more about Power Apps, and it's obviously quite a broad area to learn about, but they'll go and look into this or that or this area of it and come back with, right, this is what I think I suppose can be quite useful. Is it difficult to look at kind of like, you've got your current team and see you moved into a new company and there's a team set up there, and you've got to go and find out their kind of current capabilities. And I mean, CVs, like great, but I suppose it's quite challenging to find out their breadth of knowledge, what they know, what they don't know, so that you can understand where your gaps are or what you need to bring in.
Yeah, it is, because CVs get you so far, but a CV is always the best image of someone by its nature, and then sometimes you're interviewing and you're trying to find someone who's got more in-depth knowledge than you have, and that makes it quite challenging because you can't you can only test so far. But I think the 2 things I always I place a lot of emphasis on fit, intelligence and fit are the 2 things which I place most emphasis on. And that kind of goes, that was something I learned very early on in my career with, back again, lessons you learn, mentors you have in your early career. But in my communities where they really did, hiring me as an ecologist was by no means an exception. It's like I can remember the head of field sales in Australia, I think, was hired from. He was working in a delicatessen when he was hired. When people used to buy their lunch, it was a kind of, they go out, meet people, get to know them, go, well, you're a good fit. Come and have an interview. And if you did well, then they would train you up and things. You really see the power of that when you see people get quite senior in an organisation who don't come from a formal background. And so, although I don't go to that degree when I'm hiring at the moment, I do. I'll listen to people and think, well, do I like this person on a business level? Can I see them fitting in? Can I see them fitting in within the wider group? Because anything we do is, I feel very strongly, I'm not after heroes. I'm not after individuals who kind of be just the big brain who'll do it all themselves. I'm always after a team player and somebody who can augment the team we have already.
I can't remember what the guy's called in the Phoenix Project, the book. There is that guy that's there and everything just goes to him. And he's always solving things, and he obviously loves it, that kind of guy, that guy girl. But yeah, it's interesting because they're obviously trying to pull more stuff off because it's all that knowledge is sitting with one person. If they keep doing it, then there's that risk there, and making sure it's going to spread across a team, and that's the point of a team, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and not having those single points of failure, those bottlenecks which slow you down. But yeah,
no, completely. Yeah, I mean, what about? I know that obviously the ACCA are fully remote then, but I suppose it'd be interesting to, because you spent your career obviously travelling at different places, but you probably had teams where you were in the office quite a bit doing face-to-face. Like, how have you found the kind of remote aspect of managing a team and working with a team?
It's, in one way, it's something I've always done, but never on a continual basis. And I think that's a big difference. So I've got like overall, it's like my actual area at work. I've got the enterprise architects, solution architects, and I've got performance and planning for the IT department in there as well, and business partnering. And so that's a team of about 14, 15 people. And I don't know, we meet up. There's some people who've been working for me who I've only met in the flesh 2 or 3 times in the last 2 years. It's kind of that light, because we are a remote first company. And so we tend to get together for specific reasons, if we're having a workshop or something like that. And so the whole experience is remote, which, although I used to do conference calls, well, I've done them all my career, it's not like that now. It's kind of like I'm remote, they're remote. If you go into the ACCA office, you won't really see anyone unless you've organised to get together with other people. That's how remote we are. And it changes things. It does get us to that point, I think, where there's no presenteeism anymore. It's all about output, because that's the way Like we always we've always geared towards that as an industry, saying that's much more important to be output measured rather than to be kind of presenteeism and just kind of being in the office just to prove you're doing the work. And that's been a good change, I think.
I totally agree. The green dot of availability always been online, and it's the is it asynchronous way of consuming information. This is the meeting, but it can be recorded and digested at a time when suitable. If it is something you're going to collaborate on, great. But if you're just sharing information, you need to bring 10 people on to tell them something for an hour when they might only need 5 minutes of that information, of this bit or that bit. It's that's interesting. Oh,
I think we struggle though with. I think as an industry, we've struggled to get to that point where it's not just try and be as if you're in the office when you're not, and so it's just lots and lots of meetings, kind of lots of Zoom calls and things like this. I think for in my role anyway, it's an awful lot of kind of meetings and trying to replicate how it would be in the office. And I think that's something which I do miss, because when people used to say kind of, you work in IT, so you sit in front of a keyboard tapping all day. That was never my role. I was just walking between buildings and meetings and going to talk to people, and obviously we all do the kind of a bit of designing, a bit of architecting, a bit of email, but I was half a day I wouldn't be at my desk. Kind of definitely the last half of my careers to date. Whilst nowadays it's all in front of the desk, and I find that's
more hustle then.
Yeah, and you don't get the kind of water cooler, as they say, conversations. You don't get those serendipitous, creative moments in the same way because it's kind of tends to be scheduled time.
Yeah. Stevie did what? Where is he?
Go running after him. Yeah, no, absolutely.
No, I totally mean. It's definitely that. It's a balance in that culture, but then I suppose on the kind of the positive, the advantageous side, as there is. I mean, we do a lot of reports every year on candidates and what they want in the market, and remote working sits right up there. A lot of the big FS companies are 2-3 days now back in the office, and that can be detrimental towards the kind of people that they get. Although there's plenty of people out there that want to be in an office and stuff, but I'm sure you'll see a lot of applications from people that are quite keen on that fully remote, work-life balance kind of model.
I do think that does it does attract people to the ACCA, because there isn't we are remote first. And I was at a conference on digital workplace about a month ago now, and it's quite interesting because I attended a roundtable discussion on meetings and how we're doing meetings within the workplace. And there's probably 20 people in the room from various blue chip companies. I was the only person who came from a company which was fully remote and remote first. A lot of conversation was about how do you manage hybrid meetings? How do you manage kind of 5 people in a meeting room, 1 person from home? It was those kind of challenges around the cameras, the meeting space, and all of this. And for me, we're pretty much nearly always all remote.
You fly the flag well then? Do you go in and say, let me tell you something?
Yeah, well, I kind of say people were quite surprised by it, and there's also, which is counterintuitive to someone with my background and kind of from the journey I've been on, there's increasing evidence that kind of remote collaboration leads to greater creativity. And it's kind of there's a degree of psychology, various psychological studies behind it, but one of them is that people who may be kind of a bit more kind of introvert don't contribute well in a meeting space, which is physical, in the same way they do remote. And also those dominant voices dominate more in a physical space than they do in a kind of remote space where it can be kind of hands up and things like this. And so it seems to be there are actual proper kind of advantages if you want to brainstorm something or solve a problem to doing it where everyone is remote, which I would have always said get in a room with a whiteboard until I started seeing this evidence.
That's so interesting. Yeah, introvert and also like neurodiverse, because if you say the meeting's for, I want a meeting, on Tuesday, and this is the problem we're talking about, having that information ahead of time, they're brainstorming, they usually find that there might be a bit more creativity there, and they might not, as you say, speak up because of a more dominant voice in the room, or they're a bit more hesitant because of the environment, there's a lot there. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. How do you think, I wouldn't say 5 to 10 years because things are mental just now with AI and all the automation chat that's going on, but what do you think architecture will look like, or kind of like, working with platforms and SaaS industry in like the next, 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think, what's beginning to come across my horizon in this space, which I think it's strange enough, you'll see why this appeals to me so much, is that it's the concept of ecosystem architectures.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of going back to my root here, but things have got so complicated that they can't really be understood, and they can be understood in small chunks. They can't be understood as a whole, and by that I mean kind of the interconnectedness of these huge tech companies we're reliant on, and then all of the services layered on top of that. And each piece will have a kind of degree of kind of a resilience, or it will have a certain uptime, and it'll work in a certain way. And we don't really know how, when you layer this all up, it actually works. It kind of just does seem to work. And then something like CloudStrike happens. And the whole thing goes down in kind of various organizations. Microsoft, I think Microsoft's zones were kind of flipping and flopping until they kind of figured it out, and this to me is where it starts getting quite interesting, because you're no longer living in isolation as a company or as an architecture. You're living in a ecosystem of other architectures and other companies, and so it kind of gets you back to that concept of where you really need to start thinking in big systems. And that system thinking element, how that plays through over the next few years, I think is going to be quite interesting, because we assume it's all going to work well together. We kind of think all these different services and all these different infrastructure providers and everything will layer on quite neatly. And you pick up where things may creak and things may break. And there was an interesting report just the other day on AI, and it was about using synthetic artificial data to train AI models. And it just goes horribly wrong within about 10 iterations to where they start talking gibberish. And it's because of the fact that they're not using human created data, they were using artificially created data, which they kind of then started breaking the models. And there's a paper in Nature which was going into this, and where the fear being that the first mover advantage could be really strong here, because once you've consumed and you've kind of worked off all the human created web content, if you start consuming Gen AI generated web content, it's not quite the same for the models, it seems. They seem to struggle with it. And that's a totally unintended consequence there, where people thought, well, we could synthetically create all this data and train a model on it. And it seems there's challenges there. And I kind of half wonder whether we're going to end up with I don't know if you ever read the Black Swan book by Nassim Taleb, about kind of there are black swans, but from a probability perspective, there shouldn't be any. And these long, deep kind of events which will be destabilizing. And I think that's what might start coming out of the tech world, where we think we've got it all figured out. We think it's all kind of highly reliable. But as more and more gets kind of combined together, the layering on of all these different services, you can't predict them in the same way. And I think that's where the challenge will be, and how do you manage that risk?
Yeah, no, completely. It's crazy, the AI stuff. I think you need to be really careful. It's like I think there's teams of people that comb through data on the web, so they don't feed it, what things that are on the web that shouldn't be on the web. Like thousands of people. But I can imagine, like you're saying, everything gets too integrated or layered together. Difficult to kind of separate out, different parts of it. And then when you were saying that, I was thinking about I was thinking about fashion, and I was thinking about flared jeans, but I don't know if they'll ever come back. But things obviously go in cycles.
Yeah, they do.
And then I was like, it's like, oh, we're on-prem, we're off-prem in the cloud, and it's kind of like there's different phrases and ways of selling things, and people just start to bring things back in. If that gets too complicated and able to manage as well,
Well, you're already seeing that, because it's, I think cloud was seen, when you go back to, say, 15 years ago, it was seen as a commodity. That's how we were going to operate. We were going to kind of, you might be in Google Cloud, then your GCP, then you hop over to Azure because it's more price competitive, then you go over to AWS. And in reality, you get into a cloud, it's very difficult to get out of. You don't tend to hop your workload between different clouds. Like there's some people I'm sure will be listening and go, oh yeah, we got this figured. But most companies, you go from on-prem into the Azure, you'll stay there for quite a long time. And then you find out how expensive it is. And then that's where people have started, I think, that say actually, especially the big boys, the large banks and things, I think some of those have started kind of pulling out of being in the AWS cloud and going back to building their own infrastructure because of the, I guess, the cost benefit, but also the visibility of it all, I imagine.
I can imagine, yeah. That's crazy, isn't it? I suppose it goes in back and forth. There was one kind of final question in part 2 that I was going to ask, and it was if you had any advice for other tech leaders who are kind of building or scaling architecture teams.
Think very carefully about what kind of architects you need for your business. It's not just bright people, which is kind of what one thing you would have done in the past, and it's kind of do you need an architect where you actually need a strong, say, functional consultant? Because sometimes the functional consultant is who you need, or do you actually need a business architect to kind of really understand and work with the business? Because I think with the way that services, platforms, SaaS is delivered to us nowadays, and the way we work with our individual lines of business, you quite often need everyone to have quite a strong business architect element to even whatever role they're performing. And so I know what I find useful in the people which I've been recruiting is where they've got a degree of a consultant in them. They may not have been a consultant, they may not come from a consultancy background, but they've got that natural consultancy way of communicating, and they're looking to draw out from the people they're working with what they really need, and they're very value focused. And so they're saying, well, I'm working with so-and-so from finance. What do they really need and how can I add value to what they want? And so you still need the technical skills in there, and you still need a deep understanding of whatever the kind of product or service being built is. But it's having that consultancy skills I find very useful, because they're the ones who can get on with the business better, and it represents the fact that as an architecture function, we haven't got the authority we once had in very simple terms, because you don't need the architectural review board in the same way. And it's like I started my career going in front of big architectural boards of 10, 12 people to get approval for what I was doing. And what last projects I'm delivering are very much more working at pace with a smaller group of people, where we're getting direct approval from quite senior people within the business rather than a big architectural board all the time. And so that consultancy element, I think, is key, which probably is my way of saying the soft skills.
Yeah, and someone, I suppose it's kind of like, as you're saying, on that very don't kind of interpret what they're obviously talking about technically, but then it's very inquisitive as well, like, what about that, what about this, and kind of asking more to get, just not going what they're told, I suppose, and being that inquisitive person. Oh,
and
awesome.
Being comfortable, and just sorry, Mark, I just add that, and being comfortable not necessarily being the expert on everything, and so that they're comfortable that they're learning as well, and because you're quite often not the authority of knowledge which you once were. In the role.
So there's kind of like the personal quick fiery questions. The first one is, what drives you?
Solving problems.
Yeah.
I'd say is yeah. And when I say that, yes, I love solving technical problems. Yes, I love kind of gaining understanding, but it's doing that as a group, because one thing which I'm a great believer in, the old saying that everything I do is built upon the agency of others. Other people help me, and so if the ACCA architectural team is delivering value to the business, I'm enabling rather than leading, is the way I see it. It's a kind of a nurturing and getting that team working well, and I think there's an awful lot of satisfaction in kind of solving a complex problem and delivering real value to the business.
What about your favourite technology?
Oh, favourite technology. I've just invested in a Mamiya C330 film camera, which you can change. It's a
Wow.
TLR, twin
Hmm.
lens reflex, which means you look through one lens and you take the picture through the other lens. And I've put a couple of rolls of film through it. I only got it about 3 weeks ago and absolutely loving it. And it's totally analog. You have to send
Oh,
off the film
amazing.
to get it developed. You get it back like 2 weeks later, so you don't know what the
Uh-huh.
pictures look like. You only get 12 shots per roll.
How
So
precious that make them, though, isn't it? It's just kind of like I've not got 30,000 photos on my phone. It's kind of like here's your 12.
yeah, I
Use
know,
them
and it
scarcely.
it drives a totally different way of thinking. It's like kind of
Hmm.
like you. I've got an iPhone, and I've got a digital
Hmm.
camera, and I've got a kind of X 100,000 photos all over the place, and
Hmm.
kind of it turns into a very different experience where you kind of you're taking
Hmm.
a shot or you're getting someone to pose for you. And I'd say
Hmm.
right now that's definitely my favourite bit of technology. I can while away an afternoon and take 12 shots, and
That's awesome.
kind of
I
really
like
enjoy
that.
doing so. But yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. What about relaxing after work or kind of unwinding?
Mixture of things, really. It's I still like my hill walking and getting into the great outdoors and doing that when I
Hmm.
can. But after a day at work, that's more of a weekend thing. But I like music and I like reading. And I'm not really I'm definitely not a connoisseur of music, but I do. I'm quite sad and just put on Radio 3 and climb into an armchair and I'm happy. I'm
It's
not
chill.
kind of
Yeah,
an
yeah.
yeah, but I
Hmm.
might be listening to I don't know, Kneecap or kind of Sleaford Mods just as well. But it's just a bit
Hmm.
of music on. I enjoy just
Yeah.
kind of listening and be chilling, especially when I turn off the computer, or
Hmm.
turn off for the day. So at like 6 o'clock for turn around, I quite like to kind of have a cup of coffee or something like that, and just kind of chill for half an hour before I then switch into home mode. I find that
A
helps.
virtual commute. Yeah, just chilling out in there.
Exactly, you put it so well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you said you liked reading then, but I mean, you read some books. Is there any recommendations that you would give?
Reading's a really interesting one for me because it's I forget where I heard this, but it was somebody from the advertising world who was seen as being a super creative, and he's been asked how do you get the creativity? How do you really kind of come up with such great ideas? And he goes, it's entirely luck, but you can steer it in your favor by just filling your head full of really interesting stuff. And then
Hmm.
something more creative might pop out. And so I tend to read quite broadly. I read a whole host of things from tech books to kind of blogs and things like that. But I was thinking, what were two books which I still go back to, even if I don't pick it up, I still kind of quote it to people.
Hmm.
And there's one which you may have heard of, but do you remember Clive James, the kind of TV personality at one stage, and used to do a
Actually,
travel
yeah.
show, Australian? He's a
Hmm.
little bit before your time, but
Hmm.
he's actually a writer and a poet. He died in 2019, at the age of
Right.
80. But he wrote a book called Cultural Amnesia,
Hmm.
and it's it basically is a series of very personally written biographies of philosophers, writers, dictators, politicians, scientists from the
Hmm.
20th century.
Wow.
And what he's basically done is he's just kind of picked on an individual. It's in alphabetical order, so it's kind of you might have a Hitler next to Hayek or something like that, a philosopher next to a dictator.
Yeah.
But it's all in alphabet. There's about 200 people he's written the biographies on, but he's written it really personally. And if you ever
Hmm.
watched his shows or enjoyed his humour, because he's a bit of a comedian in his time, you can feel it coming through. And he just throws his
Hmm.
personality into each of these biographies of these
Hmm.
people. And the reason why I was thinking this was what sprang to mind is
Hmm.
it's a real tonic for the political age we're living in, because
Hmm.
he's looking back on the 20th century and he's looking back at it from the order of destruction and dictatorships and totalitarianism which went on. And he's a humanist and a kind of a Democrat. And so
Yeah.
that comes through it. And you kind of, I think it'd do certain people good to read it and remember where this kind of populism can drive us, because
Definitely,
that's
that sounds quite
coming
good. I'll
through
check it
in the
out.
book.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not one you read
Massive.
cover to cover. It's one you dip into because it's just very
Hmm.
short, 5-page
Little bits,
biographies
yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Oh, cool. Awesome. What would your second one be then?
Second one was again very different. I've got it in front of me here. It's called Victory at Any Cost,
Hmm.
and it's the biography of a Vietnamese general called Guy Ap, and he fought the Japanese, then the French, then the Americans.
Wow.
And he basically won. He's North Vietnamese communist, and
Mm-hmm.
he was the main general of the North Vietnamese army. And it's a biography of his life and how he managed to win against all the odds, against much more powerful
Mm-hmm.
kind of invaders from his perspective, which effectively they were colonists. And there's two lessons in there. One, victory at any cost. He never gave up,
Mm-hmm.
and he basically realised early on that the only thing he needed to do was not lose. He didn't need to win anything. He just needed to not lose. And so his strategy was all guerrilla warfare, and he would fight. He basically keep any kind of any of the American army and the French army kind of just unbalanced the whole time. And every now and then during the book, when you read it, politically he's forced to have a big battle, and every big battle he loses dramatically because you can't win head on. And it kind of it really stuck with me when I read through it, because one, just the tenacity of the man, like he died under house arrest for political reasons. It's kind of it's a North Vietnam being what it was back in the day. But it was just the way that he always picked himself up, always reorganized his supply lines, never gave up, and realized that the game wasn't over as long as he kept on getting back up.
Final question then on dinner guests. Any three dead or alive, who would they be? Why?
This is a good question. I started off thinking, well, who would I have? And I started thinking, I don't know, maybe Jesus, Muhammad, and Buddha or something like that would be fascinating. And I thought that's too highbrow. I'd just be totally intimidated. And then I thought what might be kind of quite fun, just to sit back with a large glass of wine, would be Trump, Putin, and Xi.
Yeah.
And just let them kick off with each other. Just sit back.
Let's go gents.
No, you won't get a word in. Just let them showcase. I just thought it could be a really interesting dinner. To sit through.
Trump's definitely, I know. I mean, I totally get, all of it, but yeah, I'm sure it would be an interesting dinner party, that with three of them.
You might, whether you could get out of it again, I don't know.
I know, totally. Afters. Jonny, that is Talking with Leaders. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed my time here.
Well, that was Jonny Mallabar, Head of Architecture, Design and Planning at the ACCA. Thanks so much again, Jonny, for taking the time. Next up, we have Callum McRae from Introbreaker on the podcast. Really excited to share his journey of a new startup. Thanks so much for listening. Cheers.